Welcome back to episode 3 of the Earth-1218 Watchers podcast.
Topic of today's podcast is Solarpunk.
Solarpunk, eh? What is it? Who is it? Can I put it on a sandwich? Probably not, but am I going to try? Of course, because giving up is for wimps.
All right there, Franklin. Calm down. See, it's only episode 3 and he's become unhinged. I can only imagine how far he's going to take this bit he's doing. On a more serious note, Solarpunk is a movement focused on a positive, ecological vision for a future where technology is used for human-centric and eco-centric purposes. The idea of it being a low-carbon and high-life movement is fundamental to what it means and how it is expressed in forms of media like the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies.
Very true. And as a relatively new movement compared to its predecessors, there's a lot of room to interpret some of these solarpunk aspects in the MCU. From the Afrofuturist nation of Wakanda to the electromagnetic field generating arc reactor, we can see various forms of ecological harmony and low carbon emission technologies. And while the MCU may not strictly be a solarpunk society, these technologies act as steps towards one.
I'm Julio.
And I'm Franklin.
And today we will analyze what it means to be solarpunk, what kind of aesthetic solarpunk has, and then apply what we find to some of our favorite movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, such as Black Panther, Iron Man, and the Avengers.
Roll the intro. Well. It seems we haven't been canceled.
We're still here.
Yeah? I'm surprised.
You know what I think we can get into?
I
think we can get into solarpunk.
Oh.
Now, Franklin, tell me, what is solarpunk?
Well, funny you should ask. I got this whole big quote.
Okay.
I can tell you. So, what is solarpunk? Solarpunk is a genre of ecologically oriented speculative fiction characterized both by its aesthetic and its underlying socio-political vision. In many ways, solarpunk is the inverse of its moodier older sister cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is perhaps most succinctly summed up in the phrase high-tech low-life, referring to the immense technological development imagined by the genre and its insurmountable social problems. By contrast, solarpunk can be said to be low-carbon high-life. Poignantly, solarpunk has no commitment to low-tech as such, but rather rejects technologies which are not in harmony with the environment. So it's different from cyberpunk that it focuses more on the ecological aspect of it, and it tries to create a future where society and nature can live in harmony off of each other and not hurt each other.
Right, like cyberpunk. I don't know if you've ever seen the Blade Runner movies.
No.
Like, the entire city is just full of smog, and it's not. It's very low life. You're not seeing many like trees or things around. You're seeing a whole bunch of people in like cybernetic enhancements and things like that. Whereas with solarpunk, you get almost the complete opposite, where the air is clean, the cities are full of life, and one of those cities just happens to be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Really?
Yeah,
Well, what would one of those cities look like?
Well, I wouldn't. In the MCU, it's more of a country.
Oh, okay.
And that country would be Wakanda from Black Panther.
Interesting. I could definitely see that, though.
I mean, like, think about how Wakanda is kind of set up as a country, and like they have the main city where they have all their people and their markets.
Mm-hmm.
But you have these huge buildings, right? But they're
Yeah.
sort of in harmony with the nature. They're part of it is like built into mountains, and they have life pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like you
they have
see in
huge
a lot of
gardens and
Black Panther
farming.
film, yeah.
Yeah,
Like at least something that I noticed, there was a scene in Black Panther where what was it? It was T'Challa and then what was the other girl's name that was gonna be like his bride? Her name escapes me at the moment, but I remember that like shortly after the coronation, they were walking through kind of the town or the market or something like that. But one thing that struck me was that a lot of the buildings were like constructed with clay,
right.
and it was kind of a natural aesthetic compared to other places which would have destroyed the nature around it to build up the new city.
You're talking about Nakia, right?
Nakia, yeah, that's her name.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like using all these natural materials, and even they're integrating in animals in their society, where you have the border tribe using rhinos as defense.
Mm-hmm.
So integrating nature in a way where it's beneficial for the nature and also for the people.
Yeah. It's also interesting how like their power source is also kind of natural related, like with vibranium, because Wakanda is known for the vibranium mound in Wakanda that has helped to propel it into the future. But not only does it like integrate into their technologies, but it also helps to like power and run everything.
It makes the entire Solarpunk society possible. If you think
Yeah,
about like nothing could run the way that they run it if you didn't have this sort of magic metal as a resource.
yeah. I would like to know how it powers everything, but then I feel like if I ask too many questions, it takes away the magic of the universe.
And even I don't even think that's the important part for the message that they're trying to send.
Mhm,
Where it's like we have these resources on Earth available, and we could make these utopias based off of Solarpunk to reach where we want to be going. It's just we
mhm,
should seize the opportunity and sort of emulate what Wakanda is trying to say.
mhm. I think we also have a clip that kind of explains the vibranium in Wakanda.
Oh, Franklin, you took the words right out of my mouth. I have a special clip right here for you.
I tend to do that.
Well, sit back as I'm going to play you a clip where Everett Ross just suffered a bullet wound, and he's taken to Wakanda to get healed.
Yes, magic rocks.
Right here is that clip.
How long ago was Korea?
Yesterday,
I don't think so. Bullet wounds don't just magically heal overnight.
they do here, but not by magic, by technology. Don't touch anything. My brother will return soon.
These train things, that's magnetic levitation, right?
Obviously.
Obviously, but I've never seen it this efficient. The light panels, what are they?
Sonic stabilizers.
Sonic what?
In its raw form, vibranium is too dangerous to be transported at that speed, so I developed a way to temporarily deactivate it.
There's vibranium on those trains?
There's vibranium all around us. That's how I healed you.
And we're back.
Uh, it's a good move. I very much enjoy the explanation there because I feel like a lot of it, like you just kind of get thrown into the world of vibranium, and there's a much needed kind of explanation of how it like is integrated with the city, and that kind of I like being in the shoes of Ross because that's usually how the audience is as to how it works.
Mhm. And even in that scene, you can even see elements of Solarpunk. Like if you remember in that scene where they go and you can see the view of the cave, and they've pretty much they've integrated their technology with the natural formations of the cave in order to more efficiently mine the vibranium and transport it. And one example is the bullet train that they have. I mean, those the the legs kind of remind me of like a big centipede kind of going crawling its way through the cave, and it's using magnets to, and probably vibranium to power itself. So all renewable resources there to get even more resources up to the surface and power their city.
Hmm. And it seems like they also like are only mining as much as they really need at the time. It's not like they're going crazy because if they have kept going crazy, I feel like they would have emptied out the deposit a long time ago because in the cave you can see all the vibranium that's still left. It's not like they're mining for mining and profit and stuff like that. They're just taking what they really need.
Right? They're not. They're. I mean, they're purposely not doing it for profit. They don't want to interact with the outside world.
Yeah.
So you don't have the world mining their precious resource away, and they're only using it for what their city needs. And even then, it's not like they need that much. You have a little bit of vibranium powers Shuri's blasters, and then an even smaller bit can just heal a bullet wound. Like
Yeah.
it's not like you need a ton of vibranium to do things. So they're conserving their resources and also building with these resources to be in harmony with the environment.
Mhm.
I do think that one sort of machine that they built that's kind of cool. It's called a dragon flyer, and it's essentially I think they describe it as kind of like a helicopter sort of deal, but it's
Is that the ships that they have and kind of the final like climax of the movie where they're loading all of the weapons onto those are the dragon flyers, the weapons that are getting loaded on there.
yes, those are
Okay.
those, and I mean their name kind of comes from what they look like, where these ships were modeled off of dragonflies and sort of the way that dragonflies get around because
Hmm.
you see it in nature. Nature's figured out a lot of efficient ways to go about things out of necessity,
Hmm.
and Wakanda has decided to emulate that in their designs for different flying machines.
For
I mean,
sure.
that kind of reminds me of you remember when we watched Nausicaa?
Yes.
That when they were in the gunship and flying through the pack of insects, like to me the ship looked just like the insects. So they were again modeling off of what nature was providing.
Hmm. And that kind of is interesting too, because at least in that world, they were saying that that gunship is one of the oldest and like strongest gunships, and it was looks like it was at least modeled off of some kind of insect.
Right, and that comes back to like the efficient designs of nature. It's going to be long lasting because well, it kind of has to be if it wants to survive.
Hmm.
So that's why
For
and
sure.
with I mean, who knows how long Wakanda's had these dragonfly ships? I mean,
I
probably
I'd say probably a while, because at least they've been using that same Black Panther ship since T'Challa's dad was Black Panther. So it would only make sense that they've been modeling it after that for at least 50, 70 years or something like that, I'm guessing.
I mean, maybe the design. I mean, you got to think he was Black Panther in like the '90s, so minimum 20 years, minimum.
Minimum 20 years. But I think that if they have the one ship, they've probably been doing it a while.
Right. So
But
I would
nonetheless, even like not just their vehicles, but most of their society is taking cues from nature to become more efficient.
right.
Like at least you can see in the scene where they kind of go into Wakanda, a lot of the skyscrapers also have various gardens on them.
Exactly. You got all the floating gardens and I think hanging gardens, what they're called.
Hmm.
Integrating the gardens into the buildings. Definitely aspects of Solarpunk showing up there. Yeah, and even going off of the gardens and the buildings, it's just really clear that Solarpunk and Wakanda are kind of hand in hand here. From that same article where you were talking about Solarpunk before, they
Yeah.
say aesthetically, Solarpunk is heavily influenced by Afrofuturism, retrofuturism, and various strains of utopianism. From Afrofuturism, Solarpunk takes an orientation towards diverse cultural forms, where the present, especially in the West, tends toward mass cultural uh, homogeneity, however you say that word,
Yeah.
and acute concern for issues of racial and gender equality. So, I mean, I for one, that's kind of clear in Wakanda. I mean, we already talked about with the last podcast how some elements of Afrofuturism showed up in Black Panther and in Wakanda, and that sort of leads into how Solarpunk the whole culture is there. I mean, everyone is supporting of this idea and working towards making it a better place. Like there are no issues that pop up. I mean, there are issues, I guess, if you want to say of like Wakandan versus non-Wakandan kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like some of the smaller issues that Western societies deal with, it's not relevant there because they've moved past that. Like who knows if
Hmm.
they had that in the first place?
Yeah. And I think another thing from your quote that was talking about what is it, the orientation towards diverse cultural forms in the like as differentiating from the West. You can see a lot of that too in Wakanda with the various tribes and how each of them kind of display their aspects of Solarpunk. Like at least with the border tribe, you can see how they're living minimalistically on the outside with kind of, at least from within the movie, it looked like almost like grass huts and stuff like that. I'm sure there's more technology on the inside of them, but their culture is using solar punk in that way.
Right. Or even with the tribe that what's the tribe that lives in the mountains?
The gorilla tribe.
I mean, it's not really still. You can see that their whole thing is they're again minimalist living, but up in mountains, and they've carved out certain areas and sort of become one with these mountainous areas.
Yeah, the Jabari tribe.
Or yeah, that's what it is.
Hmm.
M'Baku over there on his throne.
Hmm. And all of his children are vegetarians too.
Yeah, they're vegetarians. So living off the land, living inside the land with being in these mountains.
Hmm.
I don't know how
And
much
they're
more
not necessarily focused on technology. They're more focused on like just sustaining themselves. So transitioning kind of away from Wakanda, I also want to kind of bring up some other aspects of Solarpunk that we see in the MCU, but not in Wakanda, because Wakanda is kind of the idealized solarpunk society within the MCU, but there's also other aspects that we see throughout it. And I
right.
think that the kind of one of the other aspects of Solarpunk is the idea of having some kind of clean, renewable energy source. Like we brought up Nausicaa earlier, and most of their society is kind of wind powered.
Mhm.
And I think one of the best examples of this within the MCU is the arc reactor. And that starts
Right.
all the way back in, what is it, in Iron Man 1. So the first movie of the MCU. And I think that we also have a clip that kind of explains what the arc reactor is.
Right. It's the scene where he's still in the cave and he's building a miniaturized version of an arc reactor that he already has powering his building at home. But this is small, it's portable, and
Yeah.
it'll be able to power up at least the Mark 1 version of the Iron Man suit.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna go ahead and play that clip for you, Franklin.
Alrighty.
That doesn't look like a Jericho missile.
That's because it's a miniaturized arc reactor. I got a big one powering my factory at home. Should keep the shrapnel out of my heart.
But what could it generate?
If my math is right, and it always is, 3 gigajoules per second.
That could run your heart for 50 lifetimes.
Yeah. Or something big for 15 minutes.
And we're back.
Sick. So, up to that point, Tony had been captured by a terrorist organization and was being threatened to make a Jericho missile. But to get out of this situation, he decides to make the Mark I version of the Iron Man armor, but to power it, he also needs to create the arc reactor, or at least the miniaturized version of it. Because already back at Stark Industries, he had the arc reactor running, which was, according to Obadiah Stane, the original villain, was a publicity stunt to shut the hippies up. But he was able to use the palladium and other materials from various weapons that the terrorists had to miniaturize the technology and then put it in his chest to keep the shrapnel out of his heart.
Right. And it's generating. I think the math came out to, what was it, 3 gigajoules per second or something like that? Is what he said.
3 gigajoules per second. I have literally nothing to compare that to, but that sounds like a lot of energy. So.
And this is coming from a prototype out of a cave with minimal resources.
Mm-hmm.
So and he scales up this like version of the arc reactor, because the one in the factory and the one that he builds, like, they're the same idea, but the one that he builds is way better and more efficient in terms of how much power it can pump out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty sure he scales it up and he puts it into Stark Tower to power the whole building. And this the idea of having this power source sort of integrated in the buildings, I mean, you could see it. I'm going to compare it to Nausicaa, where they were pretty much living inside windmills.
Mm-hmm.
So the arc reactor powering an entire skyscraper. I mean, that technology could be applied to pretty much any other building that he can put his technology into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we also have a clip of the Stark Tower installation scene.
Right. So he is installing.
I think he's taking Stark Tower off the grid so that he can then turn on the arc reactor.
Right, and he's going underwater and using this arc reactor technology to help set up a self-sustaining power source. So We're going to go ahead and play that clip.
Good to go on this end. The rest is up to you.
You disconnected the transmission lines? Are we off the grid?
Stark Tower is about to become a beacon of self-sustaining clean energy.
Well, assuming the arc reactor takes over and it actually works.
I assume. Light her up.
How does it look?
Like Christmas, but with more me.
We've got to go wider on the public awareness campaign. You need to do some press. I'm in DC tomorrow. I'm working on the zoning for the next 3 buildings.
Back.
Yep. Yeah, so
over him hooking up
mm-hmm.
his technology, and now the building it's off the grid. It's self-sustaining. It has low carbon, high. I don't know if I would say high life, but even then, eventually it turns into a high life building with them putting in sort of like a garden area eventually.
Well, that's
a later on Like, you
That's
see that.
not even the. That's not a Stark. It's no longer a Stark building though, so I don't think that there'd be a.
No longer a Stark building, but the technology is there to set it. I mean, I would assume it'd be difficult to transition it back. So
Maybe.
I don't know. Anyway, the whole point is that there's a self-sustaining skyscraper that they eventually integrate with some sort of life aspect.
I like the idea too that like, because you see the arc reactor kind of evolve over all of the movies. Like you see it initially in the first movie, it starts off as the big one, then it gets miniaturized. In the second movie, they upgrade it with a new element, so it's producing more energy, lower cost as well. And then you keep going, and then you get to things like what is it, in Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame, where he's got nanotech. That's probably using the same technology somehow, but it's clean.
Right. I mean, he doesn't have exhaust pipes coming out of the Iron Man suit, and he's doing very high energy blasts, and it takes a lot of power to move and power these little nanobots around. I don't even know how many nanobots he had to make that suit possible. And they were all coming from this self-sustaining arc reactor power source.
It kind of gets a little bit more into the realm of fantasy after Iron Man 2, but I mean, at least in Iron Man 1, you kind of have this idea that's like something that's maybe feasible in reality.
Right, and it's again taking that step with Solarpunk to achieve the ideal society in the end. And I think in his universe, if you didn't have all these other villains that are trying to take this technology or manipulate it or all that, the arc reactor could possibly transform all of society into the Solarpunk world.
Yeah, that's another point that like in Iron Man 2 you see Whiplash, and then even later on in Spider-Man Homecoming you see Vulture, and how valuable this technology is, even though it's a clean and could be clean power source that could be used for everyone and benefit everyone. It's just it creates too much energy and it's too powerful to be left with the general public.
I don't know if it's necessarily the general public that's the issue, more that like.
Well, I'm saying more like leaving the
Whiplash
plans out there.
Like Whiplash was specifically against Stark and wanting to get back at him, and he didn't even necessarily steal the technology. He kind of just built it on his own. And then Vulture did steal the technology, but again, he had things against Stark and like that whole hero scene.
Yeah. But I mean, like the general. I mean, like having the plans out there in the public so that everyone can like know how to like create it or something like that.
Right, and I think that would be maybe a debate for another time on sort of the ethics of putting out your documentation,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what it is.
For sure.
Yeah. But yeah, Solarpunk is clearly a theme that we can see with Avengers and in Iron Man.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I think we're gonna wrap it up here. But before we go, the sponsor of today's podcast is me.
What
I
do
know.
you mean?
It's unbelievable, right? The sponsor is me.
Who allowed you to do this?
Listen, I bought this time here at the end so I could tell all of you, our active listeners in the UP, to practice Solarpunk in our own lives and rebel against the monopoly of UPCO. I mean, seriously, if you live in the UP, you know. Their rates are way higher than pretty much all other companies, and if you have electric heating in the winter, you're better off just burning a fire in your house because it'll be cheaper to rebuild the place. So,
I also have on here that this message has been approved by Phobos the cat. He's currently enjoying some catnip and clearly was out of his mind allowing you to do this.
I think he's exactly in his right mind.
Jeez.
Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode of the Watcher 1218 podcast, and we will see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.